All right, welcome everybody. So this is the third installment of the Western Lake Erie Basin Advisory Group's 2026 Winter Webinar Series. So this webinar series is in its second year, and it's designed to provide our community with information about managing the environment to reduce nutrient pollution in Michigan's portion of the Western Lake Erie Basin. This winter series will continue until April 7th on alternating Tuesdays and Thursdays at noon. And you can find the full schedule here on our upcoming events page, which I'm going to post in the chat. This has all of the advisory groups events, and if you toggle around to some of the other pages, you can also learn more about the advisory group. So my name is Allison Bressler, and I'm the program manager for the Western Lake Erie Basin Advisory Group. This is a community group that works collaboratively with Michigan's quality of life agencies to inform how the state implements projects aimed at managing and monitoring phosphorus to improve water quality in Lake Erie. So the advisory group and this webinar series are generously funded by the Herb Family Foundation for the last 3 years, and we thank them for their support. So today we welcome Laura Campbell as our speaker. She's from Michigan Farm Bureau. Laura assists farmers, agencies, universities, and legislatures with developing and improving environmental practices, industry relations, and understanding regulatory impacts important to agriculture. She co-chairs the Michigan Agriculture Environmental Assurance Program, or MEAP Advisory Council, the state's premier on-farm environmental stewardship program, and co-chairs Michigan's Water Use Advisory Council, which recommends research and improvements to the state's water withdrawal regulations. Laura earned a Bachelor of Science from Michigan State University in Environmental Policy, specializing in sustainable agriculture, and a Master of Science from Johns Hopkins University in Environmental Science and Policy. So let's all welcome Laura. And as you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we will address them at the end of the presentation during a Q&A, where you may also unmute and ask a question if you're interested. All right, so Laura, I'm going to pass this off to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Allison. I appreciate the chance to talk with everybody today. We're going to go through demystifying some issues about on-farm compliance, and that's going to offer solutions and support for Michigan farmers. Now, this webinar series is aimed at farmers and landowners in the Western Lake Erie Basin, but really everything I'm going to talk about today is applicable statewide, so both inside and outside the basin. This information is going to work for you, and hopefully will lead you to some useful resources, as well as some links to more information. So Allison, I know you're usually really good about sending out information post these webinars, and all the slides that I shared with you. You're more than welcome to send them out to anyone who asks, because I do have a lot of website links in my presentation. And so I want to make sure that folks who want to check those out are able to do so. All right, well, we'll go ahead and jump on in. This is the most common question I get from farmers. Do I need a permit for that? And it's a lot of times a very complicated question, right? Because farming of all sizes and products is an incredibly important part of Michigan, right? Our farmers provide food, fiber, feed, and fuel worldwide. It is an economic driver, agriculture is, and for stability in rural communities. And interestingly, Michigan produces the second most diverse number and variety of agricultural products in the United States, only behind California. So in a way, you could say we are the most diverse agricultural state who has water. Many on-farm activities may be regulated or require permits for environmental protection, and we're going to talk about a few of those. We'll go through pesticide application, ponds, ditches, and drains, wetlands, irrigation, livestock and manure management, fertilizer management, and on-farm processing. I'm also going to provide a lot of resources and links for more information and help, which is why I wanted to make a point of letting you know that these slides will be available. So don't frantically, take pictures of the slides. We can get that information for you, so that you don't need to worry about writing down or capturing all of the information on here. So jumping right in. First topic, pesticide application, right? And most of you guys know, especially if you've been around farming, the label of the pesticide is the law, right? The label has the registration of that chemistry, the crops you can use it on, how you store it, handle it, use it, dispose of it, what licenses may be required, as well as some region-specific directions for use. Particularly those licenses required and the application restrictions can trip people up a little bit because there are a number of pesticide products that require a restricted use license for farmers to be able to use them. You can't just go down to Home Depot and buy them. And so in order to use those restricted use pesticides, they're only available to certified applicators. Luckily, we don't have to go all the way to EPA for getting those licenses. MDARD provides training and testing to obtain what we call an RUP certificate, restricted use pesticide. Private applicators, you're getting that license if you are applying to your own farm or if you work for a farm and you are applying to your employer's farm. Commercial applicators need to get additional testing and licensing if they are going to apply pesticide products for a for-hire service. So think of you're working on multiple farms for a company that provides application services. That certification lasts for 3 years, and there's also opportunities to obtain RUP credits or retest to renew those licenses. So there is a website link here that talks about pesticide applicator certification for more information on this. And this is something that's really important because part of that testing and certification is how to make sure that you are following environmental standards as well as human and species health safety standards. So it's very important to go through that training and to make sure that you are using products legally on your farm. So some new things coming around because restricted use pesticides are not new. One of the new things that's coming out is that in some cases, and we're just starting to see this come out, the label is still the law, but the label may direct you to a website called Bulletins Live 2 for more information. Now, I did a screen capture here, and I don't want people to freak out when you see this map and seeing how much of Michigan is covered by this map because we don't have very many products that are on this list yet. EPA is slowly starting to apply this to products as they go through either renewal for their certification or if they're registered as a new product. But it is information that you'll need to know because as more and more products start having this direction to go to this website, you're going to need to understand how to use it. So what this is EPA's effort to try to keep tools in the toolbox, right? We want to. They got sued by a bunch of activists who said, "Hey, you're not doing enough, EPA." To make sure that when you register a pesticide product, that you are providing protections for endangered species. So EPA, having been sued and having lost all those lawsuits, said, all right, well, we can't just go and cancel every pesticide that we've registered because then that would destroy farming in the United States. So what they did instead was they came up with a pesticide strategy. They identified these areas called pesticide use limitation areas, where they are going to set additional regulations for use of a product. So your rate of application may be lower, or they may require conservation practices in order to use it. They're all focused on reducing runoff and reducing drift when you're using these pesticide products. So not every place and not every product is going to have them, but we're going to see this coming across more and more frequently. And the important thing to note about this is that just because the label directs you to this website, that doesn't mean that it's optional. If the label directs you to Bulletins Live 2, that is part of the requirement. So if you have to look and see if your farm is within one of these pesticide use limitation areas, that is also part of the legal requirement of using this product. So there's a lot of resources that are out there to help. I know I just gave you a very brief introduction on kind of what EPA is doing, but there are a lot of informational sources out there to help you navigate this. Particularly, EPA's got resources available in their toolbox, as well as a direct link to that Bulletins Live website. Michigan State University has tutorial and technical support for Bulletins Live. The Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, MDARD, their pesticide programs are available, as well as if you kind of like to dig into the policy of why are we doing this a little bit more, the National Agricultural Law Center, which is funded by USDA, is also a good site to take a look at what's going on in the legal and policy development sphere. So again, those links will be available to you if you'd like to get copies of those slides. All right, jumping on. Ponds, ditches, and drains. Oh my. Um, this is one of the more common issues that farmers tend to run into trouble, not because they're trying to flout the law, but just because it's pretty complicated and a lot of farmers don't understand what the requirements are. So the biggest question you should ask yourself is, if you've got a piece of property that you want to do something to, you want to build, construct a drain, you want to construct a ditch, you want to dig a pond. One of the first questions you need to ask yourself before you start thinking about the regulations is, are you constructing something new or repairing something that's already there? The next question you should be asking yourself is, who has jurisdiction over an existing drain or ditch or pond in the case of if it's bigger than 5 acres and is a water of the state, because that will tell you the level and who you need to get involved in the possibility of needing a permit, as well as if you're digging a pond, what's the size of that pond? Remember, I just said bigger than 5 acres is kind of a triggering point for more regulation of a pond. So you'll need to take some additional steps depending on the size and location of what you're doing. All right, for new construction. So you're going to need a permit from somebody if your project is closer than 500 feet from a water of the state. And for our purposes, a water of the state is an inland lake, a stream, a county drain, a regulated wetland, anything that the state is going to regulate that is not just a private agricultural drain or a tile outlet or something. Your project is going to need permits if it is in or closer to 500, or if your wetland is 500 feet or closer to another regulated water, or if that wetland is bigger than 5 acres. So if the area you're working in is considered a wetland, those are the regulations that are going to apply to you. You might also need a permit if you're working in a floodplain, depending on what it is that you're doing. Michigan law does exempt some agricultural activities from floodplain regulations, but it's pretty limited. So it's always best to check in advance before you start running into trouble. And then for any project, and this goes for new construction, repairing structures, maintaining drains, ditches, ponds, for any project, you're going to need a soil erosion and sedimentation control permit. Those you usually get from your county. Most of the time they're available from your county drain commissioner. Sometimes it'll be the county health commission or environmental health commission, but you'll need that from the county regardless of what your project is. So if you're repairing existing structures, right? That's where we get to the jurisdictional question. Who owns and who is responsible for that drain or ditch? So if it's a county drain or a road drain, a road commission drain, you cannot work on those structures without a permit or authorization from the drain commissioner or the road commissioner, depending on whose drain it is. And the reason for that is there are specific rules and regulations around what county drain commissioners can do and what county road commissions can do. And so they cannot allow a landowner, even if that drain is going across their land, they can't allow that landowner to do work on that drain without them knowing about it, without them giving permission to do it or issuing a permit to do it. And as a quick reminder here, a county drain commission is not required to give you a permit to do that. You may want to do work on a county drain or a roadside drain, and that commissioner does not have to issue you a permit. Now, what they may do is they may say, I'm willing to work with you and I will do the work. You just tell me what you need and you'll pay for it instead of having an official drain assessment for the entire district. But either way, you'll need to get a hold of those folks ahead of time. For a private ditch or drain, and what I mean by that is you've got a ditch or a drain that runs across your property. It only flows, as a result of rainfall. It is not used as a county or roadside drain. You should not need a permit for that. But if you change the outlet, if it's outletting into a regulated waterway, you're going to want to connect and coordinate with whoever has jurisdiction over that connecting waterway to make sure that what you're doing doesn't negatively impact the water quality of that stream or drain or other jurisdictional feature. For your project scope, remember, we're repairing existing ditches and drains. If you make a pond or a ditch or a drain bigger or deeper or wider than it was originally, you need to treat it like it's a new structure, right? Because it's carrying more water. It is not, you're not just maintaining it at that point. You are increasing it, and therefore you'll need permits just like it's a new project. If you're maintaining existing structures to their same design size, depth, direction, you may not need state permits. And you'll still want to check ahead of time, but you should be able to go ahead with that project, except for those soil erosion sedimentation control permits, right? Those are going to be needed regardless. And there's a reason for that. It's because if you're going to be digging up the ground anywhere where that sediment might run into a waterway and not only cause sediment pollution of that waterway, but then be carried downstream and cause problems downstream, you want to make sure that you're preventing that. And so those soil erosion permits are important because they're super cheap, right? But what they do is they lay out some requirements that you have to use, such as using, silt fence and other kinds of things to make sure that you are doing minimum damage or minimum loss of sediment during your project, and that you're minimizing your impact to the environment. So those are extremely important. They're almost always going to be required when you do any project on drains, ditches, ponds, any of that stuff. So more resources to help here. Obviously, Eagle is the agency that regulates waters of the state. The nice thing is, and one of the services that's handy for them that they provide is they offer pre-application meetings. So if you're asking the question, boy, I don't know if I need a permit for that, you want to meet with Eagle staff and talk about what all do I need here, they offer that service. And that link will take you to how to get a pre-application meeting. Your conservation districts and Michigan State University Extension are both confidential services that you can ask questions and kind of, instead of having to do that dance of, hey, on my friend's farm, not mine, I might have this problem, and what would you advise him, not me? Go to those folks if you have questions that you really just kind of want to feel out the situation, if you're likely to need a permit, or other resources that you need. Your county drain commissioner obviously is a great resource. With the caveat that drain commissioners, it's not their job to know what state permits you need. Some of them are really up on it and they'll tell you, oh, you need this permit, that permit, these other things, talk to Eagle. They may not, and they're not required to tell you that. So don't just get your soil erosion permit and then go out and start digging because you think you're done. I can't even count the number of farmers that I've had who run into problems with that because they thought they were doing the right thing. They got their soil erosion permit, they're ready to go. And it turns out they weren't. Same thing with the county road commissions. They'll only issue permits or authorize work on road ditches or drains. And remember, their number one job is the safety of roads, right? They are not there for the convenience of the farmer. I don't know a more polite way to say that, but essentially, just remember when you go to do work along a county road drain that you can request permits, and if they get denied, it could be because the county road commission is worried about the safety of the road, and you may need to think more about your project before continuing onward. Okay, wetlands. We're going to totally protect wetlands now. And spoiler alert, there's going to be a bunch of pictures in these next few slides, and I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, they are all wetlands. And the reason why I point this out is that the picture on the top here on this slide, this is what people tend to think of when they think of a wetland. It's got cattails, it's got open standing water. I mean, you can tell nobody's farming in that, nobody's building a house in that. That's clearly a wetland. There are a lot of other features though, Anything that has hydric soils, shallow groundwater hydrology, and supports wetland plants and trees that can also be considered a wetland that may not look like a wetland. So this picture on the bottom kind of looks like your typical woods, just like a woodlot on a farm, but it could be a wetland. And just because there's not standing water in it all year round doesn't mean that it's not a wetland. And the other thing to remember about wetlands is that the wetland requirements depend on the program, right? So as farmers, we deal both with uh, the waters of the state that our state agency, the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, manages. This applies to everyone, whether you're a farmer or not. There's also, for farmers, programs offered through USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, those Farm Bill programs, whether it's conservation programs, crop insurance, disaster assistance, getting loans. They also have wetland compliance requirements, but they only apply to farms. And the key thing here, and this is another one where I get a lot of farmers who run into trouble because they don't understand that the standards are different. Because these are two different programs, and even though everybody agrees what's a wetland, those two programs have different definitions of what they regulate as a wetland. A determination from one agency doesn't apply to the other one. So if you've got a USDA map that points out here's all the places where my land's prior converted, and here's all the places where it's highly erodible or non-highly erodible, here's the places that are wetland, and here's the places that are open for farming, you can't take that to Eagle and say, I don't need a permit to work, to work in this area, and it's not a wetland because USDA says it's not. Because the way that they regulate those programs is different. You've got to go to each of these agencies to get some assistance. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through here. So, starting with Eagle, this is your state requirements. This applies to everyone, whether you're building a house or a Walmart, or you're constructing a road, or you want to farm, you're installing irrigation, anything that you want to do that's in a wetland. Wetlands are regulated by the state if they are any size that are closer than 500 feet to inland lakes or streams or 1,000 feet from the Great Lakes. They're also regulated if they are located anywhere, but that wetland is larger than 5 acres. Now, there's also some language in the statute that talks about rare and imperiled wetlands. Those also require permits to operate in. They're fairly rare, hence the name. But just be aware of those because most of the time what you're going to be dealing with is distance and size of that wetland to determine if it's regulated. But there are some cases in which a wetland that wouldn't otherwise be regulated falls under that statute and that requirement for a permit just because of what kind of a wetland it is. So, what do you need a permit for if you're working in a wetland? You need it, obviously, if you're going to drain that wetland, dredge in it, if you're going to fill it, if you're going to build something on it, any kind of development or construction. The key kind of little bit of nuance to this is that wetlands require permits for farming if it's a new development. If the farming has been happening since before October 1st, 2013, that's when our state wetland law changed, then you do not need a permit to farm in that wetland because you're continuing a pre-existing operation. You can also have wetland determinations or wetland delineations done by any professional who's qualified to do so. And it's a good idea to get that done if there's a question about whether or where you'll need a permit, because that way you've got an exact map of where your wetlands occur on your property. There are a lot of great resources to give you a general idea, and I'll talk about some of those later, of where wetlands are. But for the actual on-the-ground knowledge, you'll want to get a determination, you'll want to pay for it, because you'll want to make sure and have that in your pocket. And for Eagle's purposes, yes, you can pay their staff to do it, but you can also hire your own professional and probably get it done a little quicker. All right, USDA. Now remember, this is just for farmers, right? USDA, I say regulate, but really what I mean is these are compliance standards, right? USDA Farm Bill programs are not required to participate in. So their compliance standards for wetlands only apply if you are participating in USDA programs. If you're not in any USDA programs, this stuff doesn't apply to you. You would just look back at what's required under Eagle. So USDA, they actually regulate more stuff, right? So remember, Eagle only cares about a wetland, or they only regulate a wetland if it's closer than 500 feet to a stream or a pond or a lake, or if it's bigger than 5 acres. For USDA, any wetland that's in a tract intended for annual crop farming, any size, any location is included. Now, they do have exemptions that the state law and Eagles regulation does not have, and that is for prior converted cropland, which is you were farming it since before the USDA requirements came into play in 1985. Prior converted farmland gets an exemption from the wetland compliance requirements, as do farmed wetlands. Again, USDA, not Eagle. USDA wetland requirements also recognize the work that is done in county and road drains. So, for instance, if you've got a county drain that runs through your property, you can't farm it if it's a wetland, but you're not going to get penalized for work that's done by the drain commissioner. And USDA will recognize, hey, this is a converted wetland, but the farmer didn't do it. It's a drain, it's a county drain, so therefore they don't get penalized. Here's another difference. USDA has to perform the determinations that get done for those programs. You can't hire your own consultant and have USDA accept those determinations. You also, as you sign up for programs, you have to certify that you will not drain, fill, remove vegetation, or farm areas that are determined as wetlands unless you are in a situation where it's a farmed wetland. Most of the time, this is going to be situations like grazing, kind of a low impact operation, or unless you plant your farm to perennial crops, right? Think orchards, think trees, think long lasting materials like that, not annual crops. And again, just pointing out here, stuff that doesn't necessarily look like wetlands can still be wetlands. All right, resources to help. At the top here, USDA, that's got their wetland requirements in a fact sheet. Eagles wetland resources page is there. Michigan Wetlands Map Viewer. Now, this is not a regulatory map. It doesn't define where Eagle's going to necessarily regulate wetlands, but it gives you a good starting point for where you might need a permit from Eagle. So if you're looking at a piece of property and you see that the Michigan Wetlands Map Viewer tells you that this is that this is likely to be a wetland, you're going to want to call Eagle and see if you need a permit for the work that you want to get done. Now, this next document is super useful, and I don't know when it's ever going to be updated again, but it does do a side-by-side comparison between Eagle's and USDA's wetland requirements. And so I have used this 1,000 times just to kind of explain to folks what the difference is between these two programs. And then the last set of links is actually a program that can help farmers if they want to replace or restore a wetland in another spot, if they've either run into a violation or if they are looking at a farm plan and saying, hey, this wetland is right in the middle of my field. What if I restored an area that was in another location, either on my farm or nearby, so that I can farm through this area? That's called wetland mitigation. And so those resources are available, again, both from Eagle and from USDA. All right. Just a little bit about irrigation here because there's a lot to it, but for the purposes of today's discussion, just some general knowledge and general guidelines. If you are going to install surface or groundwater withdrawal with a capacity of more than 70 gallons a minute, which sounds like a lot. I mean, 100,000 gallons a day, that sounds like a lot, but it's really not. That's not going to get you anywhere close to putting in, an inch of water on on your farm. You have to register that withdrawal before you install it. You should also know that most counties, and there are, I think, about 11 that don't, but most counties also require a well permit from the health department. And this is regardless of whether that well is for drinking water or not. And the reason they do this is to protect those aquifers from people who might drill a well improperly and might actually mess up the aquifer that is used for somebody else's drinking water. So you're going to go to both the state and the county for most of your water withdrawals. You have to use a licensed well driller if you're withdrawing from a groundwater supply. Obviously, if you're pulling from the surface, you're not going to be drilling a well, but you do still need to register that water use. Now, in addition to your initial registration, you also have an obligation to annually report your water use to MDARD. And this is for farmers. Again, there's a different site if you're using that capacity of water and you're not a farmer. They actually report to Eagle. The nice thing here is, in addition to the regulations, there's actually best management practices out there that can really help you not only save water, but also save money because water may not be expensive here in Michigan, but the power to draw it out and put it out onto our fields is. And so the more we can save energy, the more we can save money. And we also get the side benefit of saving water as well. So, resources to help on this. First one, to register your water withdrawals. This is a really handy tool that you can use. You do have to log in to be able to use it, but once you're in, you can play around with it. You can change your well locations. You can change your pumping schedules. You can do all kinds of things before you actually hit submit so that you know what it is that you're getting, and what concerns there might be in terms of environmental impacts from your well. To report your annual agricultural water uses, there's the website for MDARD's water use. And I get this question a lot from farmers. Well, what if I didn't irrigate this year? You still have to report. Your report is just going to say 0. And that's because we want to make sure that we know who's still irrigating. There are a lot of abandoned irrigation wells out there that some folks don't even know where they are because they pre-existed all of this regulation. So one of the ways that helps us keep track as a state of what's going on where is that water use reporting. Now, the best part, as I told you, there's a lot of non-regulatory best management practices. Those are available through the generally accepted agriculture and management practices. And that's what this last link is practices that kind of just help give you guidance on how to save energy, how to maximize your efficiency for your irrigation, how to calibrate your system, and ultimately how to save yourself money. So that's a really helpful resource to go to. All right, livestock management. We all know everybody poops. And so this is probably the biggest topic that we get questions about here at Farm Bureau is how to manage your manure nutrients, right? Because there is a basic requirement in our state law that everyone has to follow. State law prohibits discharging a pollutant into a water of the state without a permit, of course. And permits for livestock operation mostly depend on how many animals you have at one site. So I've got a list of some various animals. People always ask, do we really have duck CAFOs here in the state? No, we don't, but we still have a regulation for them just in case. Same with the horses. We don't have any horse farms that are big enough to be a CAFO, but just in case we do, there's numbers there. Now, if you're probably looking at that and saying, wow, that seems like a lot of animals. I don't have that many. Do I still have to get a permit? The answer to that, I hate to say, is it depends. So you may still have to get a permit even if you don't have that many animals, if your farm has a history of discharges. And so if you're a large farm, a large confined operation farm, if you're a smaller farm that's had a history of some discharges and some problems, you have to get a permit. And the permit requires a lot of different things, and they're all aimed at making sure that you are applying the right amount of manure to your fields and that it is staying there and not being lost to waterways where you can have nutrient pollution and cause harmful algal blooms and other things that you're trying to prevent. So the key to your permit is going to be that comprehensive nutrient management plan. It shows where all of your manure and waste from your farm goes. You also have to do annual reporting with the permit. The permit sets out application limits, not only buffers or setbacks from surface waters, but also the amount of nutrients that can be applied. And that's based on nutrient sampling that you'll do on your soil, as well as on the manure that you're going to apply. And then you compare that to your yield expectation and what crop you're growing so that you know how much that you should apply for your crop growth, but also want to make sure that you don't over apply. Part of the permit also requires management of all wastewater. So runoff from your silage pad, your milk house waste, any wash water. You've got to show that you're managing that as well in the permit. Like in the picture here that shows this very cool injector system for manure, you are required to subsurface apply that manure. Whether you broadcast it on the surface and till it in, or whether you use one of these cool injectors, you're required to get that manure underground, again, to reduce the chance that it's going to run off and cause nutrient pollution. And there's also limits on frozen ground application. So you're going to want to be careful if you've got a field that's frozen. Obviously, frozen ground can't absorb manure nutrients. So you want to make sure if you have to apply during the winter, that you are working within the confines of your permit and that you're also using smart practices to make sure you don't lose all those manure nutrients as soon as it melts. So what if you don't have a permit? What's available for you? That's where we turn back to our generally accepted agricultural and management practices. The GAMPs offer non-regulatory guidance to reduce the risk of nuisances and water and air quality violations. These are really, really handy documents. They're updated annually so that they follow changes in technology and university research. That each of the GAMPs, and there's 9 of them, I think, are, those are managed by and updated by university chair people with committee members from industry and from environmental groups and from state and federal agencies. And when you're looking at those GAMPs, some of the key provisions of the GAMPs for managing manure, you're going to find is real similar to what it looks like in your permit. Again, these are non-regulatory, but they're good guidance. And the reason why I point them out is because if you're not a regulated livestock farm, you can still be subject to violations if you have a runoff issue. If your manure is getting into streams and lakes and ponds and wetlands, you're going to get a violation even if you're not a permitted farm. So following these GAMPs can really help you to minimize the risk of that, right? Because it's basic advice. You're avoiding steep slopes. You're setting your application back from surface waters and wellheads. You're sampling your soil and manure nutrients to calculate your application rate. You have a plan for manure storage and removal of that storage to prevent runoff and leaching. You're keeping your livestock out of waterways except for controlled crossings. You're incorporating your manure if possible, and you're applying in the spring if possible. That one is not, it kind of has dual benefits because you're not only minimizing the opportunity for runoff because you're applying the manure very close to when the crop is going to need it, but also it's going to help you because you're avoiding the opportunity where those manure nutrients are going to be lost to you and therefore not available for your plant growth. I mean, that's why we apply manure, is so that our crops will grow. So you want to make sure you're getting the best bang for your buck when you use these practices. So resources to help here. If you want to look at what a larger farm is going to be regulated to do, that's Eagle's CAFO permit regulations. CAFO obviously stands for Concentrated Animal Feeding Operation. Those are those large permitted farms or medium-sized farms that have a discharge history. Your non-regulatory farm guidance is going to be under the GAMPs. We've also got a lot of great resources at Michigan State University Extension, their manure education program, as well as a fairly new program that we very unwisely started during COVID, but it's going gangbusters now, and that is the Michigan Manure Hauler Certification Program. This is a voluntary management program. It offers online and in-person training, as well as safety inspections and education on both protecting your workers, but also protecting the environment when you are hauling and applying manure. That's a voluntary program, and it is very, very useful. And it is also very low cost to participate in. Okay, what about fertilizer compliance? I mean, we talked about manure compliance, and it's true that in Michigan there's fewer regulations around fertilizer, but we still have that basic law. Remember, no discharge of a pollutant into waters of the state. And that's where your generally accepted ag and management practices can help here too. Those give you guidance like keeping your storage leak and spill free and secure. Now that's actually a regulatory component. Storage, we don't tend to think about as much in terms of, hey, I might cause water quality problems from my fertilizer storage, but the chance for a catastrophic accident where you lose a lot of fertilizer all at once because you've had a problem with your storage can cause a lot of water quality problems. So that's why we regulate it. However, there's also good non-regulatory guidance in there, and you'll notice some similarity with the manure application guidance, right? So we're sampling our soils to determine our application rates for crop needs. We're calculating our other nutrient sources. So if you use cover crops, manure, biosolids, I say organic byproducts, and what I mean mostly by that is stuff like compost. You're minimizing your risk of nutrient loss. There's guidance that helps you pick a slow release fertilizer. You're incorporating or banding your fertilizer. You're splitting your applications throughout the season to sort of spoon feed those crops. And again, you're avoiding the frozen ground application to make sure that you don't lose what you've just purchased and put on your field. It also helps you set up a system to where you can keep records of your applications so that as your yields move around, you can adjust your application rates to match your application to your crop production. And also there's practices in there to help prevent soil erosion and to make sure that you're not over irrigating in order to minimize loss of those nutrients. So lots of good information about that in the GAMPS. Fertilizer storage regulations, you can find them right here. Those are available from MDARD, your storage inspection checklists and contacts. Again, here's your nutrient GAMPs, your non-regulatory guidance, as well as, since I mentioned compost as some of those organic byproducts, there is some processes to register yourself as a compost producer. That information is available there as well. And in addition, some fertilizer and nutrient recommendations for all different crops. Again, Michigan's a very, very diverse state, so we have a lot of different crops we produce, lots of different resources there. So for your row crops, your edible beans, sugar beets, forage, potatoes, vegetables, and fruit. Lots of stuff available for nutrient recommendations for those. All right, last big topic here, and then we'll go to questions. So we're going to talk last about on-farm processing, washing, and discharge. So once again, remember that part about no discharge to a water of the state? This counts for groundwater too. The state regulates groundwater as a water of the state. So if you need to wash or clean or cool your crops before sending them to storage or market, if you do on-farm packing, processing, prepping crops or meat for value-added sale, and in particular, if your packing house or your processing stations are not connected to municipal wastewater systems, you may need a groundwater discharge permit. And this is not a new regulation, but it is something that's been getting more emphasis from the state recently. So I think a lot of farmers are out there thinking, oh, this is a new regulation, when really it's just a new effort to make sure that we're staying compliant. So a groundwater discharge permit, it's a permit from EGLE, the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, and that is for wastewater that is discharged to or in the ground. So you can either use subsurface treatment like a septic system, or you can treat it and then land apply it via an irrigation system. Permit requirements here. The considerations that you need to think about are your volume of wastewater, how your wastewater is handled or treated, what's in the wastewater, not just what organic materials are in it, but are there any cleaning products in it? Are there any sanitary products in it? You've got to think about all of that before you think about where and how are you going to discharge it. There's a lot of context in your location. What are you close to? What land application areas or septic system fields are you going to be using for this wastewater? And are you going to do surface or subsurface release of that product? There's monitoring requirements as well as a certification process as a wastewater operator that's required for these permits. And I know that sounds scary because you think wastewater operator, you think somebody who's working down at the wastewater plant. And there's different levels of certification, so don't be too scared. There is guidance and testing help that's available from EGLE for that operator certification. So restrictions on land application of wastewater, right? We're talking both surface and subsurface. You may be restricted if you're releasing within 100 feet of property line, within 50 to 200 feet of certain water wells. You cannot allow the wastewater to move to a property that you do not own or control or lease. You can't cause erosion with your land application, and you can't allow runoff. Pretty basic stuff. More resources available to help on that. EGLE's got their groundwater discharge regulations that are there at the top. For those who are looking for some help with designing their systems, MDARD actually does have a wastewater infrastructure grant program that is available, and that helps you make improvements to your wastewater system so that you can make sure that you're complying with those regulations. As well as we've got environmental resources available on our webpage at Michigan Farm Bureau. So, with that, just kind of bringing this all together, I know I covered a lot of stuff, but as you guys know, especially those who are online who are farmers, modern farming is complex. This great picture that I pulled down from the 1880s from the Holland Sentinel, farmers don't farm like that anymore. Now we use technology, now we use advanced science, and along with advances in technology and science, there come a lot of regulation and requirements. It is better and less expensive to ask before you start work. There are also a lot of non-regulatory programs, as you heard about today, to help you avoid those environmental risks. And there's also a lot of resources to help, right? Go to your land grant university. That's their whole job in extension is to help you with your farm. Go to Eagle, go to MDARD, go to Michigan Farm Bureau and your county farm bureaus. Go to your conservation districts, who are really crucial partners in helping farmers and landowners to protect the environment in their local community, as well as the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So lots of people out there to help.